guys, welcome to my mini forecast for the first new moon of January 2022, and that's the new moon in Capricorn, the sun of goat. So this is just a quick mini forecast because I haven't done one for a while, but really I think the best thing to do is to go, if you haven't already watched the two forecasts that I did for the lunar and the solar eclipses. I think those are the best ones because those will give you a kind of a macro overview of the time period between December 2021 through to about the sort of end of April, beginning of May 2022. But yeah, I just thought I'd kind of check in because I haven't done a forecast for a bit, and I thought it might be interesting to have a kind of look at the particularly the human design, and also, you know, it's a kind of a new year, and you know, it's just good to kind of check in with the energies and see what's sort of going on. So let's have a look and see what we can see in the chart, and then we're going to have a look quickly at the human design, and yeah, we'll kind of see what comes out. I haven't really prepared a lot, so it's going to be very intuitive. But my overall feeling is that, you know, when we are talking about the moon in Capricorn, generally speaking, the moon is considered to be detrimented in Capricorn because it's the sign opposite to the sign in which the moon is naturally at home, if you like, you know, Cancer. And so therefore, it doesn't always work that well. It does tend to kind of somewhat mute things, make things a bit more somber, dampens down enthusiasm a little bit, makes us quite serious and thoughtful. But that's probably not a bad thing, given that it is the beginning of the year, and there are two planets retrograde, Mercury and Venus, both of which are quite important when it comes to money and finance. So I think it's a good time to kind of reassess and just, you know, maybe take stock in terms of your overall investment strategy, how you'd like to sort of do things going forward in 2022, because I do think it's going to be an interesting year in terms of, you know, the financial global stock markets, particularly, you know, the American ones, and of course they are the sort of leaders. Whatever kind of happens there tends to sort of have a ripple effect elsewhere. So a lot of people, you know, predicting possibly towards the sort of autumn of 2022 or 2023 that we might be sort of tipping over into recession. So I think, you know, the mood is kind of getting a little bit more somber, particularly since we had that square between Saturn, which rules Capricorn, and Uranus on December 24, I think, was when it perfected. And since then, the stock markets have been in a little bit of disarray, and you know, there's been a lot of confidence that has kind of evaporated from the market. A lot of retail investors have kind of run scared, which is hardly surprising because there's a lot of uncertainty around at the moment. But anyway, let's look at the chart and see what we can see, because it is kind of an interesting one, this particular new moon. It happens very close to the Bitcoin sun. So let's have a look at that and see what we can kind of see. So if we switch over to the Bitcoin chart and we transpose the moon on here. I mean, first of all, it's an interesting date. So it's the 2nd of the 1st, 2022. And if we look at numerology, it's kind of interesting. So it's 2 plus 1, which is 3, plus 6, so that's 9. And 9 is kind of an interesting number. It's a number of kind of lessons and of wisdom, and that kind of thing. It's 3 times 3 as well. So in some systems, it's considered to be very lucky or auspicious. If you think about the tarot, for example, a lot of the 9s are about self-sufficiency, about wish fulfillment. So there's a sense of abundance associated with this number, which is nice. Now we can see the sun and the moon at 12 degrees of Capricorn, sitting very close to the Bitcoin sun. You can see the Bitcoin sun is at 13 degrees of Capricorn, and so the sun will essentially move into that position a day after, so on 3 January 2000, 2022, because that's the day when the sun traditionally is in that particular degree. You know, the sun tends to move 1 degree a day, but very, very close to a conjunction, and a sort of an exact conjunction, and that is very positive because the sun rules the chart, the Bitcoin chart. So this is really the kind of life force energy of Bitcoin. This is that kind of orange, yellow, beautiful energy that we associate with the Bitcoin logo. It's the color of fire, it's the color of the solar plexus, it's the color of will, it's the color of gold. So I think all of those things are kind of interesting. It's almost like we're kind of moving to a reset. here for Bitcoin, almost like a new year for Bitcoin. And what's I think quite positive about this placement is that it's happening in the sixth house, which is traditionally the house of health and of the sort of everyday workings of Bitcoin and that kind of thing. How Bitcoin is used on a day-to-day basis. And so I do think that there's going to be a little bit of a renaissance or a kind of resurgence when it comes to the way that people view Bitcoin over the next 2 weeks or so. It could be that we see more people starting to catch on to the idea of using Bitcoin as a currency, in the sense of using it for payments and for kind of everyday transactions rather than fiat currency. There's a lot of talk about how fiat currencies failed at the moment, and it's interesting because I tend to think of the kind of fiat currency as being very much associated with the signs of Capricorn and of Saturn, the planet that rules Capricorn, because it's so associated with the establishment and with convention. So it's kind of interesting. There might be this sort of overlap between fiat on-ramping systems into Bitcoin on one hand, and also just more facilities or avenues through which people can send and receive Bitcoin payments. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 2 weeks, because this is a new moon, so we are talking about waxing energy, so we're talking about fresh starts. And then what's also fascinating is that the sun and the moon are making a trine to the oh no, it's not, it's Venus. It's a Venus, that's right. So we've got a Venus which is retrograde at the moment. Venus retrograded around about the time of the solstice in December, so just on the day of the Gemini full moon, and she will continue to be retrograde until the end of January. And it's interesting that she's in the 22nd degrees, given all these twos that we've got, for this date. So there seems to be something in the numerology that's kind of important. Now Venus, as I said before, Venus is the wealth maker. So she's always very important to consider when it comes to any kind of, all-time highs or auspicious development when it comes to wealth, creation, luck, opportunities, that kind of thing. Now she's making a trine to the Bitcoin Saturn, which is at about 21 degrees of Virgo in the second house, which is the house of, as I've said before, it's the house of value and of earned income. So that's very, very positive. And even though she's moving backwards, so she's actually moving closer to an exact trine, over the next couple of days. And as she does so, she's also going to be making a very positive aspect to Neptune, which is currently transiting through Bitcoin's 8th house. And you can see it's sitting very close to the Bitcoin Uranus, and Uranus rules the descendant in the chart, so this has to do with investors. And we are talking about the 8th house, which for me is very much about shared wealth or kind of derived systems of wealth. So in the sense of, funds, ETFs, that kind of thing, where you don't always necessarily invest directly in Bitcoin. You invest either in some kind of fund, like an ETF, some kind of derivative, or you invest in a trust of some kind that has bought Bitcoin, and you then buy into that trust, if you like. So this could mean that over the next week to 2 weeks, that we could see some news around a new ETF or some new fund that sort of improves sentiment, because we're talking about Neptune coming up to Uranus, which is about investors. And on top of this, we've got Uranus emphasized twice. So transiting Uranus, which is currently at 10 degrees or so of Taurus, is also making some very positive aspects to the luminaries, so the sun and the moon, at the time of the just before and just after this full moon, and this tends to bode very well. Generally speaking, it's about kind of nice surprises, plot twists that are unexpected but positive. And of course, Uranus is transiting through the 10th house, Bitcoin's 10th house, which is so much to do with how people see the future of Bitcoin, how positive and optimistic they feel about, what Bitcoin can do, maybe to sort of change their lives or to change the society in a positive way, that kind of thing. So somehow these things all seem to be intertwined. And as I say, confidence at the moment is a little bit low, but I wouldn't be surprised if something happens to improve outlooks, particularly for retail investors, and for those people who are kind of in the space, perhaps for like career reasons, who are developers or somehow involved in a venture capitalist fund or something that is centered around Bitcoin. So that's also quite positive. And I also think that with Venus moving back towards Saturn, that this means that it almost kind of ameliorates the difficult opposition that Saturn and transiting Neptune are still in, and they have been since around about October or so, when we had that kind of Evergrande crisis beginning. The Pisces, I don't know if it was a full moon or a new moon, I can't remember now. When sentiment really seemed to kind of dampen, and we started to get this uncertainty kind of entering into situations. So Venus ameliorating that with this trine, and given that Venus is retrograde, I think it could have something to do with going back or looking at something in a different way. Looking at a past idea or a past app or a way of using Bitcoin, something in a different way, which could bring about a bump in price, because we are talking about Saturn in the second house. So certainly that could be helpful. If we look at what Venus rules in the chart, she rules the 11th house, which is of kind of groups and things like social media, and she also rules the 4th house, so the house of sort of roots and excuse me. She also rules the 4th house, which is the house of kind of roots and the fundamentals of Bitcoin, if you like. So there's something in that. There's something about the relationship between the health of Bitcoin, its workings, its kind of fundamentals, price, and then it's sort of its future, what it can kind of do, where it's headed, as well as this idea of shared wealth or that kind of thing. And of course, January is traditionally tax month. It's when a lot of people do pay tax. So I don't know whether somehow this 8th house sort of emphasis has something to do with kind of tax breaks or something of that ilk. But that's just something to kind of to think about. Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of the main transits that I want to look at as far as the moon is concerned. I think what we should do now is have a look at where exactly the sun and the moon sit in terms of the human design, because that can give us a little bit more information. We can kind of drill down and get a bit more detail. Okay, so if we have a look at the Stargate alignments and sort of activations in terms of the human design body graph, we can see that the sun and the moon fall into gate 38.3, so in other words, hexagram 38 line 3, which is in the root center. So this has a lot to do with kind of wealth creation, with financial stability, with the stability of Bitcoin itself. So it may have something to do with volatility, and also just generally speaking, again, the fundamentals, what Bitcoin needs to sort of function and to operate on a kind of a day-to-day basis. But it's also, the root is very much about wealth creation too. And here we see that this particular hexagram has to do with opposition or struggle. So it's where we tend to sort of encounter opposition or problems, and we have to kind of fight through. And I think that's very fitting, if we think about the sign of Capricorn and the mountain goat. This is a very determined sign. It's a sign that doesn't give up easily. Even, it perseveres through adversity and kind of keeps going, and has a degree of kind of grit and determination. And I think that's kind of what is required now. I do think that that this January has a kind of a muted feel to it, because, as I say, Venus is retrograde, and then mid-month Mercury will kind of retrograde as well. So there is this muted feeling going into 2022, and I don't think it's helped by this very serious new moon. But I think if we consider that the sun and the moon are kind of in line 3 the hexagram is all about alliances. So I think it's really about finding ways to kind of cooperate or create consensus amongst people in the Bitcoin community, or just generally find ways through difficulties. So say, for example, in America, the SEC and so on are making a lot of noises about potentially finding ways to introduce new rules around Bitcoin. So kind of know your customer with exchanges, and also possibly introducing kind of new categories of tax for people that are kind of based or domiciled in America. And it may be now that there's a need for some constructive talks or kind of appeals to the powers that be, and to try and sort of bring about a little bit more consensus and sort of reality around how much tax can actually be collected, when it comes to that type of thing. And then if we think about Uranus, so Uranus is in gate 24, so this is hexagram 24, which is in the it's in the Ajna center. So the Ajna center is that green triangle, which is traditionally associated with the third eye. And this is a really interesting one, actually, if we think about the fact that Venus went retrograde, as I say, around about the time of the December solstice, the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, which is when the sun ingresses into the sign of Capricorn. And this particular hexagram is actually associated with the winter solstice. It's called return or returning generally. And it's when, as I say, we reach the sort of the maximum point of darkness, after which the sun reverses direction or declination and starts to rise again, in kind of in the sky, so that we get more light, being kind of cast on the planet. And so, the days get longer, gradually things get a little bit warmer, etc., etc. So there is a sense of perhaps we're kind of reaching kind of a nexus point, or a sort of a low point in terms of the biorhythms, and then as a kind of collective. I mean, January is generally it can be a little bit low after all the sort of jollity of December. A lot of people can kind of start feeling a little glum, and as they kind of look at their bills after Christmas, and they consider their tax, that their sort of tax breakdown, all of those kind of things are not exactly, they don't make for great reading. But I think, if we consider that we're talking here about revival or return, I think it's saying that we have to kind of have a little bit of faith, stick with things, and just know that times are getting better. And then if we look at the line, we talk about line 4 here, this is all about kind of retreating or moving. So, you can read it in one of two ways. It's either associated with the hermit, which means that there's a need to kind of go within and to do some soul searching and to reconsider, or just contemplate things in silence, so that we get clear about where we want to kind of head next. Or it's also associated with the moving center, and Karsha talks about this as being about moving the capital city, and he said the center of life is shifting, and this could have to do with changes to do with fiat currency, with that whole financial system, that there is some kind of implosion kind of slowly happening, and that we need to sort of move with the times, if you like, in order to sort of adapt to that, even if it means temporarily kind of going on alone, or making decisions independently of what everybody else is kind of doing. But there is this reassurance that if we return to ourselves and to our own center, to what we fundamentally believe, we won't be sorry, that we will kind of we will soon receive a fertilizing shock. So, which is kind of interesting, because that's associated with thunder, and of course thunder is very much associated with Uranus. So I do think it's kind of saying that we must see this as a kind of pause while we gather energy for a decisive new move. The things are shifting, but temporarily it might not feel like it. We might feel like we sort of kind of walking through mud, or just, meeting with a lot of opposition in the external world. And so I don't really see, given where these placements are, that that we sort of likely to get any kind of bump or rally at this point. I just think the energies are too muted, certainly during January, to really warrant any kind of euphoria or kind of over optimism. As I've said, in my 6-month forecast, which you can see on YouTube, I do think that we are looking more towards, February, possibly March, when Venus and Mercury are both direct, and Venus approaches Mars for some really wonderful conjunctions, and this could be very good for Bitcoin. So you can watch my video, because I do actually give some of my top dates for when I think we could have some rallies, that kind of thing. So yes, I mean, those are my overall thoughts as far as Bitcoin is concerned. As I say, not a lot of news really, but sometimes it's good to just kind of check in and see where things are. So I hope that's been helpful. But yes, wishing you a great 2 weeks and Happy New Year. This is supposedly the year of the tiger, which is associated with the sign of Aquarius, actually, which is quite nice, given that the Bitcoin descendant is also kind of ruled by Aquarius. So hopefully that bodes well as we move into the first quarter and towards the spring of 2022. But anyway, take care, all the best, and I'll see you again soon.